everyone. Happy Friday. We did it. We made it through another week. And now it's time for happy hour. And happy hour is a time where we watch a woke training or two, as in the case today. And I drink some beer and we talk about it. And we do this because it is very important to listen to what these people are saying in the full context, the full breadth of what they're saying. Because I truly do believe that people who attend happy hour as well as Socialism Saturday, I believe that the people who attend these things on a regular basis, you guys understand more about what the far left is doing than pretty much anyone else on the planet. How scary is that? Because I really believe that we are one of the only communities on the planet that are actually listening to these people in their full form. We listen to it from start to finish. We watch the boring bits. We watch the cringy bits. We watch the mind-boggling dystopian bits. We watch all of it. We are trained to sit our asses down and watch things we don't agree with for the sheer purpose of understanding exactly what the enemy is doing and what the enemy is teaching so that we are in a better position to fight back against it. Now, we got to hunker down to business today because I'm going to be honest. I have an interview at 7 p.m. So we have but 2 hours and I have two videos that I want us to watch today, and both of them come from the wokest of the woke college, Teachers College at Columbia University. Teachers College from Columbia graduates the most woke teachers that you are ever going to find anywhere, because when the Frankfurt School came to America, guess where they set up shop? Columbia University. And thus, Teachers College was born. It is the farthest of the far left. And so we're going to watch two presentations from them today. And we should be able to get both in as long as I don't talk too much. And they both come from an advocacy week that they did. The first one is teaching the teachers at Teachers College. And this is literally on the Teachers College YouTube page. I'm not just positing that this is from Teachers College. It's literally on their effing YouTube page. Advocating for LGBTQIA plus rights. Join government relations and graduate student life and development for a Pride Month Teachers College Take virtual workshop for the Teachers College Columbia University community to take action in support of LGBTQ plus rights, especially the Equality Act. Talk about issues you care about to learn more about how you can reach out to legislators to support the LGBTQIA plus community. So we've got that one, and then we have this other one, Education Moving Forward, Anti-LGBTQIA plus policies and current curricular practices. The Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and Expression Special Interest Group at the Comparative and International Education Society celebrates Pride Month 2022 in a special virtual panel with educators, activists, and scholars. Join us to learn about the status of LGBTQ plus people in schools and ways to promote inclusive and affirming schools for all students, teachers, and families. I think we're going to start with this one because it seems a little bit more woke to me than the other one. They're both going to be uber woke, but that one seems a little bit more. And so that's what we got on the deck today, guys. Now I've just got to breeze through a couple things real quick. Number one, tomorrow is Saturday, and that means it is Socialism Saturday, and we watch real live socialism on my channel every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We start a little bit later because it's my weekend too, all right? And so tomorrow, shout out to Trendolin. Trendolin found us the Seattle Socialism Conference from 5 years ago. This is an older presentation from 5 years ago, pre-Chaz. So I want to see what the socialists in Seattle were talking about 5 years ago, because wouldn't it be funny if they talked about the formation of the Chaz in that presentation, but no one knew about it because no one had ever bothered to watch or listen to them? That's going to be a goodie, and we're going to watch that tomorrow at 6 p.m. And on Sunday, if you are a member of my supporter community, we have movie nights on Sunday in my supporter Discord. And this Sunday, we are watching A Little Chaos, a little romance for the month of February. And this is in honor of our friend and iconic Unwoke activist Gabrielle Clark. Gabs has done more to fight back against this far left ideology in school than most people in the world. She was the mom that filed the first ever lawsuit against critical race theory in schools. She has taught parents how to detransition their kids when they're socially transitioned in school, because that happened to her daughter. She is a wonderful woman. She is a member of our community, and we will be watching her favorite movie in honor of her birthday, which was like a week and a half ago, for movie night on Sunday in the Discord. Now, how do you get access to my supporter Discord, you ask? I'm so glad you did. Number one, you can become a member on this channel. That will get you access to the supporter Discord. Number two, you can head over to activelyunwoke.com/support. You can sign up as a paying member of my locals community. You can sign up as a paying member of my Patreon. But the other way you can get access to it is become a paying member on my Substack. And my Substack is really where I'm focusing a lot of my energy moving forward. Not that I'm not doing things on those other channels as well, I am, but Substack is really becoming my main content hub moving forward. I have a goal of getting 50 new paid supporters on Substack in the month of February. And guess what, guys? I'm like 75% of the way there. So you guys have shown up in a big way for me this month. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to even get started on next month's goal a little bit, but it's really, really great. And if you want to get access to movie night, just join up on my Substack. And then tomorrow, I'm going to send out an email tomorrow on my Substack that looks a little bit like this. It's called the Unwoke Roundup. And at the bottom of every week's Unwoke Roundup email, you get links. If you are a supporter, you can see here, this section is only for paid supporters. You get links to be able to access the Discord and also our private supporter calls. So that information will be coming out tomorrow. So if you'd like to get in on that action, head over to Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. You can read my latest article about proof that spending more money does not build better schools, which just got put up today. You can also read about yesterday's, spy stream snafu, where they ran running as soon as they figured out we were watching their presentation. I mean, I just felt like I was doing them a favor recording their presentation and broadcasting it live on the internet. Why didn't they want us to see exactly what they were teaching about gender inclusivity in K-5 schools? Anyway, I cover stuff on my Substack almost every single day of the week. You can sign up for free, but if you want those extra perks, you can become a paid supporter for $5 a month, $50 a year, all that good stuff. I really do appreciate it. All right. Now, before we get into the presentation portion, of course, I'm still going to have a beer. I don't care if I have an interview with Seven or not. I'm still going to follow happy hour tradition. And so let me show you what beers I have for today. And you guys get to vote. So the rule for happy hour is I walk you through the craft beers that I got, and you guys get to vote on which one I drink first. And then if I get to a second one, then I get to pick. But you guys get to pick the first one. Today we have from Throwback Brewery in New Hampshire. This is called Cheek Squeaker, or Cheek Squealer rather. And this is a sour blonde ale with cherries. Cherry sour. So that might be really good. Now, the next one I got pretty much because of the can, because you guys know I have a collection of beer cans that I like, and I was like, this is so simple. It's like a white label with a dinosaur on it. What the hell is this? This is from the Gummy Saurus series from, where is it brewed from? From Tripping Animals Brewing Company, which of course is one of my favorite brewing companies. And this is a sour ale with peaches, marshmallows, vanilla, and lactose. So we got our peach sour there. So we got a cherry sour, a peach sour, and then I got a couple of stouts. The first stout is called Whoopie Pie in the Sky. And I just kind of liked the name of it. If I'm honest, I also really do like stouts. Stouts are pretty much my favorite beer. After sours lately, I really like sours too. But this is a milk stout with chocolate, vanilla, and natural flavors. Natural flavors, of course, being whoopie pie of some sort. That's an option. But I gotta admit, my favorite can of the week goes to our last contender. I had to get it from Urban South Brewery. Who doesn't love gremlins? Come on. This is called No Chocolate After Midnight, and it is a chocolate candy stout. All right, so I've got the poll all set up. Is it going to be the cherry sour, the peach sour, the whoopie pie, or no chocolate after midnight? Cast your votes. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to get set up to stream this here presentation. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I hope you guys are all having a glorious day. I got a lot done today. I was pretty pleased, actually. Let's see. We got our presentation set up and ready to go. Oh gosh, you guys really want me to drink? Okay, the Gremlin beer is winning by like a mile and a half. All right, we're drinking the Gremlin beer. I haven't seen Gremlins in years. Not in years. Let me just put the rest of the beers in this here cooler. And let's see, with 57% of the vote, the Gremlin beer it is. Let me show you guys. I'll do a nice little pour for you. We'll have to see. Hopefully this isn't like tar and fat. Oh gosh. Ah. Oh no. It's already fizzing all over my desk. Hang on. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh. Did you just Victor, I need some paper towels, please. It's exploded. It exploded. What happened? My beer exploded, Victor. Can you give me some water on some of them, please? Just get some on what? Thank you. Sorry, it's in my glasses. It's everywhere. The gremlins made my beer explode. Oh no! It exploded so far. I am not drunk already. I'm not. I swear, it just exploded everywhere. Oh gosh. Oh, thank you, Vic. Oh, I meant for the paper towels, but I can take the paper towels and put the water on them. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Victor. My husband to the rescue. As always, everyone say hi to Victor. I'm still drinking this beer. I've now earned this beer. I'm going to be like 15 fucking minutes late for this interview. Hang on. Sorry. Well, there's a lot of head at least. All right. Yeah, exactly. Mass genocide is saying the peach sour never would have done that to me. It's true. It's true. The Gummisaurus is looking on in shame at the giant puddle of beer I have on my desk right now. That's okay. We're going to keep going because you know what? The show must go on even if my mouse is covered in beer. Hang on. Well, what an eventful way to start happy hour. Guys, let's get this presentation going, and I will continue cleaning beer on my own. And please mount that like button if you are grateful that my husband has come and saved the day over the exploding gremlin beer that you guys all voted for. So really, it's your fault. Happy Friday, guys. Let's get this party started and learn about all the insidious things going on at Teachers College Columbia.
I'm Janice Robinson, Vice President for Diversity and Community Affairs at Teachers College, Associate Professor of Higher Education, and I am TC's Title IX Coordinator as well. I just want to thank you for joining us for this timely and important discussion. Education moving forward, anti-LGBTQIA+ policies and current curricular practices. We are pleased to co-sponsor this program with Go Lead, which is TC's Global Observatory of LGBTQ Education. Last year, we hosted an inaugural lecture to highlight the incredible work that Go Lead was taking on, particularly discussing how they planned to create a central resource hub to support educators, decision makers, knowledge brokers, specialists, and the general public to support LGBTQ plus youth. We are pleased to collaborate again with Professor Oren Pismoni-Levy to continue the conversation about education, inclusivity, and equity for the LGBTQIA plus community. In framing this conversation, we will hear from Dr. Sandra Schmidt,
This
Associate
beer better be
Professor of
good after
Social
all this
Studies
trouble.
Education and the Program Director
Gosh.
in Social Studies Education at TC. Professor Schmidt will discuss her work related to LGBTQ inclusive curricular practices in the era of anti-LGBTQIA plus policies.
How is this policy? Hang
Professor
on.
Pismoni-Levy
Hang on.
to
oh gosh, no, I didn't mean to do that.
And another
no!
really
Oh no, I'm already screwed all this up. Hang on. I always do this. Where was it? So what I was trying to do was pause this.
Today is with a dude who
What the fuck?
Now we know.
No.
Better Feds Farm.
No.
Now we know.
No.
Better Feds Farms are run by 17 different families
Jesus
across
Christ.
the Midwest
Hang
who care
on.
for the cattle themselves. They raise all of their
This
cattle
is not remotely what I'm
following
trying to do.
certified
Hang on,
ANYA
hang on,
standards,
hang on.
controlling for genetics.
Shut up, Michaela. So what I was trying to say before I got so rudely derailed by YouTube being a dick is, how is this possibly the era of like anti-LGBTQ policies? I wasn't actually having one of those days until like right now. It's a happy hour kind of thing. So like what I was going to say is like, how is this possibly the era of anti-LGBTQ policies? Gay people are more accepted than they've ever been in the world. And it's like, if they're not, it's because of their fucking activists. It's because their activists piss everyone off. But I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and I remember a time when gay people were significantly less accepted than they are now. They just added sexuality to like the Civil Rights Act. They can't be fired because of their sexuality. You can't discriminate them based on their sexuality. They have marriage. They have all the same rights as everyone else. How is it possibly the era of anti-LGBTQ anything? All right, now we got to find our place.
and current curricular practices to continue the conversation about education, inclusivity, and equity for the LGBTQIA plus community. In framing this conversation, we will hear from Dr. Sandra Schmidt, Associate Professor of Social Studies Education and the Program Director in Social Studies Education at TC. Professor Schmidt will discuss her work related to LGBTQ inclusive curricular practices in the era of anti-LGBTQIA plus policies. I will invite Professor Pismoni-Levy to give a brief welcome on behalf of Go Lead.
No,
and introduce Professor
fucker!
Schmidt. But before doing so,
It got on my shawl. It got on my fucking white shawl. God fucking damn it. This beer has ruined everything. This beer has ruined my shawl that I've been working on for weeks. God damn it. I'm never buying dark beer again. It's going to be sours from here on forward.
I want to take a moment to acknowledge Pride Month. During this month, we celebrate freedom, equity, inclusivity. Additionally, we shed light on the history of discrimination and hate in our community and what we have faced. We also take this time to celebrate the progress we've made in our society and are reminded that the fight for a more equitable and inclusive world absolutely continues. This work is not limited to a month of acknowledgement. We must be vigilant in our efforts to break down these barriers and hate every day.
Fucking gremlins. Now, gremlins ruin
without further
everything.
ado, I would like to introduce Professor Oren Pismoni-Levy, but I'd like to share his brief bio. He's Associate Professor of International and Comparative Education at Teachers College, Columbia University. His scholarship centers on the intersection of education and social movements. Specifically, he's interested in the emergence of movements that challenge schools and education systems worldwide, the role of both transnational and domestic actors in the development of these movements, and the intended and unintended consequences of the movements. Much of his work focuses on three educational movements: international assessment of student achievement, educational and sustainability education, and sexual orientation and gender identity. His recent work examines the global diffusion, Teach for America, and Teach for All, and the opt-out movement in the United States. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my my good colleague, Oren Bismoni-Levy.
Did anyone watching today, has anyone done Teach for America, perchance? That's watching. The reason I ask if anyone's done Teach for America is I did like an alternative spring break in college where we did Teach for America for like 4 days, and I got carted off to like Mississippi, and it was like rural Mississippi, like Confederate flag flying in the town square, rural Mississippi. It was really, really rural. Anyway, like it seems like is Teach for America, am I wrong to say that Teach for America is like uber woke? Because I feel like I didn't realize it at the time in college, but in retrospect it seems a little bit woke.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janice. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon if you are in New York City or in the East Coast, and good evening or whatever it is where you are. I'm excited to work again with Janice and her fantastic team, and I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for hosting these events year after year, even during the pandemic, which is not something that I take for granted. So thank you so much, Janice, Juan Carlos, Janelle, Melissa, and the team. I have the honor to introduce my colleague, Sandra Schmidt, and I will read a quick bio about her, and will also give you some fun facts about Sandra. Sandra, are you ready? So Professor Schmidt, as Jenny said, is an associate professor of social studies, education at Teachers College. She's also the program director there. She received her bachelor's degree in political science, economics, and women's studies from Swarthmore College, her MA in curriculum and instruction from the University of Michigan, where she also received her PhD in teacher education.
I'm chugging this beer now. I feel like I've earned it.
Prior to obtaining her PhD, she worked on education initiatives in Malawi, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, and taught secondary social studies within the US. Her research, which I find fabulous,
beer's all right, not worth the explosion or ruining my shawl.
Her research interests include geography education, critical social theory and geography,
critical social theory, what the fuck is that?
Education, post-colonial theory, gender and queer theory.
What is gender and queer theory? Great. Critical social theory.
Her recent publications have been focused on queer theory and global social studies education.
Oh, great.
A student of mine who worked with Sandra says,
this woman focuses on queer theory and global social studies education. Nothing could possibly go wrong with this.
Wonderful things about classes on spatial analysis. So if you're interested in that. And fun fact about Sandra Schmidt, I owe her my marriage. Sandra organized an ARA panel in 2012 where I met my husband, Professor Noach Dresner, from the higher post-secondary education. Sandra didn't know us, but she put us together on a panel. 10 years after, we are happily married at the same college with a baby. So thank you, Sandra, for your intellectual contribution, but for everything you did for me personally. So without further ado, Sandra, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that introduction, Oren. And I love the fun fact. I love that I take great pride in that, although I did not know all of you at the time. It was so wonderful, kind of the union that came out of that fabulous panel. So I'm going to actually do a little screen share here to present some of this work.
All right.
I've been asked today to think a little bit and share with you.
I've gotten my shit together.
Work that I've been doing
back.
Around inclusive curricula. My work works with both young people as well as as well as teachers who are doing the work of inclusive practices.
Do the work. Do the work.
I intentionally kind of left off the Q and the plus when I titled this slide, because I think it's worth, as we talk today, and I know people really want to talk about the kind of current bans that are happening LGBTQ youth in schools. And I want to think very seriously about what the language of those policies does say and doesn't say, and that the word queer is often missing. And one of the things that I want to propose today is that one of the things about using queerness is that the queerness, the opportunity that queer is missing might become part of the work of the subversive work that we continue to do.
The
and how we might
subversive
utilize
work
that
they
in this
do.
work. So I'm going to start with 3 kind of images from
Thank
current
you,
research.
Sam.
And there's a number, as Orr mentioned, I'm working on a number of different projects right now, some working with teachers, some working with young people, and some looking at policy.
So is it possible that critical social theory could be like, I mean, theories around society, revolution, dare I say, abolition, liberation? Is that possible?
So I'm going to kind of share these with kind of 3 recent works and kind of explain why each of these
It's
is
probably
here.
a good tip,
But each
Grandma.
of these
I'm
for
going to
me
work on that.
reflects what I want to, one of the things I want to really emphasize of what part of the culture is that we're talking about right now. And I think there's a lot more news about the anti-LGBTQ policies. But there's a lot of stuff happening that is worth noting.
Policies?
So this picture is a picture I took along the Hudson River Greenway, and it's in Midtown across from, it's like 12th Avenue, I think like 44th Street, and I forget the street number. But one of the things I think interesting about this billboard is it places this very kind of uncontested statement into the space of the city. As a social text, it reminds us about the spatiality of citizens, of gender, of sexuality. And the billboard circulates a kind of a socio-political message about queerness within a commercial and tourist area. I think it's worth noting kind of where this is located. It demands attention, and its message, celebrating and possibly normalizing youth, acts on those who gaze up. The billboard is significant kind of in this moment as a reminder to tourists visiting from these places and kind of sends a very strong political message through its use of space. I'm going to share this quick TikTok video.
Oh, we're learning from TikTok again. It's always the socialists that want to learn from TikTok. What? What the fuck? Did she know that said that in that song? That doesn't really seem appropriate for this sort of thing. I'm just saying. Trans people are predators dressing up to go in girls' bathrooms. That's what the TikTok says. I'm not saying I believe that, YouTube. I'm not saying I believe that. I don't believe that. I'm just reading the image in case people can't. Why are they playing this song? You're going to get me demonetized. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? God damn it. Hang on. I'm just going to wait for her to talk again. I'm not getting demonetized because of this bitch.
Hey, TikTok, stop playing. That works. So in other work using TikTok, I use the work
potentially get demonetized for calling her a
TikTok
bitch
creator
too,
named Beyondre. And Beyondre is really
there was
important
no reason
in
to play that.
disrupting this this trans logic that is imposed upon. And I think this TikTok in particular was one that I focus on a lot because of the various ways in which it utilizes various kind of uses, the predatory language, the predatory music, kind of the way in which the music itself signifies girl through her genitalia and through this rape culture that's part of this.
What?
But then set aside from that is her playful smile and dancing, and the dress that belie the possibility that she might be read as a predator.
What are you talking about?
And in this
you didn't
work,
even show us that.
There's a comment, one of the commenters writes, but can you imagine how confused people would be if you walked into the men's room? And so kind of really pushing back at this language and discourse that's happening. And so she takes up in her TikTok, she often takes up these pervasive political cultures that are happening in the world around us and directly confronts them through the ways in which she possesses her.
She literally is just making things
her own
up.
Body and her own identity.
It's true.
This third is a quote. Judith Butler has been publishing a number of times this year in The Guardian. And in her most recent piece, she wrote a lot about what is provoking this backlash around gender. And she writes that reactionaries perceive gender as a dangerous, if not diabolical, ideology threatening to destroy families, local culture, civilization, and even man himself. She reminds us very importantly of the very kind of material consequence of this reactionariness. There's now trans-free spaces in Poland. Trans youth, as we know, in the United States are prevented from entering bathrooms, athletic teams. LGBTQ refugees in Kikuma refugee camp in Kenya hunker together to keep vigilant watches to protect their bodies. So queer resides then in this kind of complex cartography of these material artifacts that perform queer. We have in here these bodies that are confronting gender and sex binaries, that confront the closed match to those bodies. They receive and confront oppressive rhetoric and policies that seek to erase queerness and other homonormative discourses. They play with queer space. And we see this happening alongside. We have this reactionary, and then we also have young people and teachers who are doing the work to confront. And I think it's worth holding those into conversation. So what I want to think about today is just that, is this kind of, what is this reactionary oppressor language that we're hearing in these recent laws? What are these simultaneous inclusive LGBT mandates? And then I want to think about staying with queer by looking at the specific work about queer history and youth are doing today. So very quickly, I wanted to share these two kind of maps from an organization, kind of this mapping LGBTQ rights, because I think it's important as we talk about where policies do not exist, to also pay attention to where policies do exist. And so as I look at this map, I think our attention is drawn. I mean, obviously half of the country is untagged, which means they have no laws protecting LGBTQ students. We notice that in the dark green states and the more green states are ones that have specific protections around trans students, around sexual orientation, around gender identity. And the kind of cautionary sites are the kind of the most damaging, where there are states that actually prevent trans students from using school facilities consistent with their gender identity.
So this is all about bathrooms,
we see quite
essentially.
An array. We focus a lot on
bathrooms
those
and locker rooms.
Kind of more orange and are targeted, but we also have a lot of this kind of this work in green about states leading the way. And I think we need to continue to talk about what those states are doing.
What's going on in New Hampshire?
Anti-LGBT rhetoric and conversations.
I don't like that.
Relatedly, that on curriculum, we've been hearing a lot about Florida's Don't Say Gay bill and the number of states that have subsequently adopted or proposed that.
Look at
6
that
states have already signed that into legislation.
Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? Look at how few dark green states there are. Dark green is good for them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Only 7. How great is that? That means this is like our select white pill moment for the day.
Legislation, but we also have 7 states that explicitly mandate LGBTQ inclusion in state curriculum standards. We have additional states like Maryland and Massachusetts that don't have a law on the book, but they have included them. They've included LGBTQ history across their curricular framework, even if it's not legally mandated by the state legislature.
LGBTQ history.
So these these two things are kind of coexisting, and we get a lot of attention right now and need to focus a lot of attention on what's happening in the states that are in orange. But I also want to take the stories from the states that are in green and think about what is it, how can we have these parallel discourses so that we don't get kind of caught in a trap where in our goals to resist and react, we don't continue to produce and create queerness. And I think that's part of what I think is also potentially lost.
Let's see, I got a super chat here. Thank you, Nathaniel. Why does the left always refer to the bodies when they are giving talks? Well, they refer to bodies because their immutable characteristics are the things that they care about most. They want to deny humanity. They try to deny humanity all the time. And so what goes on inside of a person is a lot less important than how they are showing up in the world or, how we can observe them. That's what they base their intersectionality, progressive stack, oppression hierarchy thing on. So that's why they're going to refer to them as bodies, because they're quite literally denying the humanity of the people that they're referring to try to fit them into some category.
In this work. So very briefly, the 2 laws that people,
thank you
these
for
are
asking,
just 2
Nathaniel.
examples of laws. The Fair Act in California the Fair Act in California is the first to have LGBTQ history and mandates this inclusion and talks about, I want to kind of focus on this language that specifically mentions men and women. So it's interesting to have this statement about the contributions of men and women alongside the inclusions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans, kind of simultaneously setting up a gender binary and simultaneously questioning that gender binary. But I think it's worth paying attention to the language that is in these curricula that they are and are not using as we make sure that we are inclusive around gender and sexuality. So in terms of meeting those kinds of standards, a lot of the teachers that I work with in my study are really doing a lot of work that I would call kind of an inclusive history approach. And an inclusive history approach, I give some examples here, is really an opportunity to think about what is LGBT, in this case, content. And to do this, the most common approaches are to locate LGBT people and events in history. This often means locating people, perhaps they've been closeted, we can then assign as gay. So this is very common and a very important kind of contribution that's been happening, and new people, events are making their way in. The teacher that I cite here on this page is talking a lot about the strategies and how they use activist teaching, using Keith Haring's work to really show students not just kind of the LGBTQ history, but also to demonstrate the principles of activism that cut across time and are generative to young people today who might be fighting similar fights today. So they look at these strategies, so they're learning kind of LGBT content as well as activist strategies that extend more broadly to their lives. And so figures like Bayard Rustin, Alan Turing begin to get their place in classrooms. Their presence, their identity as gayness become very important. But I also want to point out that one of the
Alan Turing's gayness is possibly the least important thing about him,
kind of
or interesting thing about him.
Time, where we think about a progressive accumulation of rights, and we think about a story.
Alan Turing basically won us World War II. What do these people care about? He's gay. And I'm not saying it's an unimportant part of his whole story, because he was chemically castrated by the British government for being gay, and that's like not cool, man. But there are many more things that are important and interesting about Alan Turing, like the fact that he invented AI and basically won World War II and was a legitimate genius in every possible way, that are way more important to me than who he wanted to sleep with.
Of queerness that don't necessarily kind of complicate the gender and sexual variance that is also part of our history. So furthermore, one of the things I want to think about is the way in which gay is a relatively modern and Western term. So what that means is that we're looking across the globe, we're looking prior to 1869, what is the language, who are we looking for? What are we excavating from the archives when we don't have the language to ascribe? We're looking across the globe when we realize that gay is a certain kind of Western political terminology. So how do we excavate queerness across the globe in an LGBT framework that is most of these state mandates? So two of the people I call upon a lot are Jose Muñez and Sarah Ahmad, who I've cited here. And one of the things that Jose Muñez was trying to bring to us was the idea of thinking about futurities and thinking about the ways in which we might kind of glimpse the future through the work that we're doing today, in an ongoing critique that in some ways we are leaving the future not queer, that we're leaving the present not queer enough to imagine a queer future, that we're becoming very inundated.
We're leaving the present not queer enough to imagine a queer future. Why are we imagining a queer future?
With kind of a normalization of queerness, that we begin to stop imagining the excess that might generate a queer future. And also kind of to cite the work of Sarah Ahmad and thinking about this notion that she calls straight time, and the detours that we might need along the way, rather than creating these progressive and linear ways that we walk through time and space. So as a brief example of that, I've just kind of shared really quick glimpses into this work, and I'm happy to talk more. But as a really quick example of that, here's an example of a teacher. They talk about this is the work that they're doing kind of in ancient history and saying, well, we don't have gender sexuality across ancient history. And of course, this teacher's work says, no, that's exactly what we do. Every culture has queers. Every culture has gender nonconforming people in particular spaces. And this is then the work that he does across his classrooms by investigating the few sources that we do have from the ancient world to really begin to talk about and disrupt the languages. And some of these, I argue, are very approachable, even within the work that is happening in California. So the examining the idea of a woman king, and what does it mean to have a woman king, and what does it mean to assign gender to king and queen roles in ancient history is a very provocative way to not say gay, but still do the work of beginning to question how gender binaries are built and how gender roles and gender identities are assigned and ascribed onto roles, positions, and bodies. Another example of this work then is looking at kind of this work in some
Thank you, Rosalind. I appreciate it.
I emphasize modern here because once we get into the 18 and 1900s, we begin to change the discourse in the history because we now have people in moments that are more recognizable through the languages of homosexuality, through the language of gay. So we have different languages that have risen. So, but these teachers are also still trying to think about a queer history, ways in which we might kind of using this to kind of think about disruption, to pay attention to the ways in which normalizing practice has come to exist and to function. So for example, Teacher C uses this work in a book called Beloved Sisters and Loving Friends, which is a collection of letters between Addie Addie and Rebecca, two women living in the Northeast in the 1850s and 1860s. And in his classroom, they really analyzed these stories and what are these notions of desire? What does desire look like? How does desire define our relationships, and what role do they play? What does a friendship look like? And the whole point of his opportunity is not to label, in this case, the women as lesbian, but to ask this question as they wrestle with what does it mean to be in love with a woman and have these expressions of love and desire toward a female friend, and also be expected socially to marry a man. And so there's this heterosexual marriage and this intimacy amongst women that kind of produce kind of a parallel understanding, right? In a modern contemporary framework around sexuality, it doesn't fit in a clearly defined space and not in a box around heterosexuality or lesbian. And so this is that work as an example of kind of queerness. Furthermore, one of the challenges we face is that young people themselves are amazing content creators. And queer youth are
only
pushing the
queer
boundaries
people
of how
are
we
good
and
content
really keeping
creators.
queerness alive. They're pushing the boundaries of how we understand gender, sexuality, and it's much harder, unfortunately. A lot of the work I do is on TikTok, and it gets better videos, which are much harder to screenshot onto here. So I've given some that I can, but there's so much more out there if you actually get in and start watching the material and watching the content. It's much richer. But you see young people really challenging and this becomes this process where they're questioning and reforming kind of what it means to come out and forcing us to think about, rethink what we mean by gender, the ideas about the notions of binariness of gender that have often been part of a conversation. And similarly, I drew this for a paper really thinking about these videos that I've been watching and thinking about what it means for young people to come out and this kind of transition of communities, right? And how is it that we can help as educators? How can we help if kind of the pre-coming out person has one particular family and social locale and school setting and comes out? As they transition, how does the locale, the family, and the community around them respond and take that up as well? And so this is part of that queer work that I challenge us to continue to think about with young people who are transitioning and coming out and how they're disrupting our senses of community and family. So I'll just end with thinking about what I started with, which is what does it mean to stay with queer as a form of resistance? And first, I just want to remind us that as we talk about doing battle with these policies, which is certainly necessary, it's also necessary to stay with what's been defined as potentially a queer agenda. That in states like New Jersey and California and other states, we have curriculum content, we have people creating curriculum. We need to take up this and let those lead the way and make that work visible. We need to allow young people to become visible on how they're using social media to maintain queerness. So we need to keep that alive as we then do the work to in these reactionary states. So some examples that I came up with in kind of resistance becomes, what it would mean to actually remove all sexuality and gender talk. So in states like Florida, if you refuse to use mother or father, if we can't say gay, let's not say anything that has to do. Give that a try.
They want to remove the language mother. Okay, I'm sorry, I have to clip this. They want to remove mother and father. Hang on, let me just make sure I've got this set up properly. I apologize, guys. This just takes a second. I do. Clip, 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 clip. It is time to clip.
Media to maintain queerness. So we need to keep that alive as we then do the work to in these reactionary states. So some examples that I came up with in kind of resistance becomes, what it would mean to actually remove all sexuality and gender talk. So in states like Florida, if you refuse to use mother or father, if we can't say gay, let's not say anything that has to do. Give that a try. See what that does. See how that disrupts the absences that those kinds of conversations create. What does full erasure of gender and sexuality in the curriculum actually look like? And how might that actually be a way of creating conversation amongst young people? We can use queer paradigms like I've done here that really dig into the study of social structures. We can begin to interrogate these assumptions of roles, as I already mentioned. We can continue to read queer authors. I think it's important to remember that authors and historical figures are multidimensional figures. And then also very importantly, because young people, particularly in states where they're targeted, are continuing to use digital spaces, how is it we support digital literacy and safety among students who are using these spaces to find community, to find activist support networks, and to locate themselves? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I see many people are reacting with clapping. I will join. This was fabulous. We have half an hour and I want to keep at least 10 minutes for Q&A from the audience.
Yes, Q&A
so I'll
is
start with,
always the best
Sandra, if you
part.
don't mind, a couple of questions that were pre-submitted and some of the questions that I prepared. Maybe a quick
She looks like a true
moment
believer.
just
This woman
to,
looks like a problem.
set the terminology. We got a
Yes,
question
exactly,
that says
Christopher.
the follow. As an educator,
She has
I'm
no
confused
soul.
about proper terminology. LGBT, LGBTQ+, cisgender, and then the use of pronouns. Not understanding if I need to be cognizant of all of them or what is the most respectful way to manage a classroom or conversation. He's asking, or she's asking, sorry, what is, if we can set up the language where this diversity may likely exist, and perhaps what do we need to know when we use these labels?
So it's a great question. I love this question. And I think it's actually a really, really difficult question to answer because there isn't, I don't know, Warren, you might want to talk about this as well. From my perspective, there's not one set agreed upon language that we use. I tend toward using LGBTQ+. That is my kind of preferred language and thinking about. I also sometimes use queer and I'll define and talk about why I use queer and what for me using queer embodies. And so I think the more important thing, so maybe there's a right language we should agree upon, but for me, the conversation is what is the conversation we have around the language choices we make? So I don't think we're ever going to get the language right in the way that the question's being asked, but I think the question is how are we also talking and having conversations about our choices and decisions about language? Whenever I write papers and I talk, I very specifically mention at the outset, what is it? Why is the language I'm choosing the language I'm choosing, when and why? So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is when I'm talking with students, I listen to students. So my thing when I'm working with young people is I listen to what young people tell me about themselves, and I use that language back with young people. So as young people talk to me in their class and they self-identify, I use that language either globally inclusive in the classroom and specifically then when working with those young people. So I think that's the other part, is very much being kind of listeners and learners in the space. And I think young people are always giving us new language, which I also think is helpful. And again, it comes back to them listening. How are young people giving us new language to talk about?
Follow the young people. That's Fieri. You don't let the young people teach you. You are supposed to be the professor.
After we establish the importance of language, can you tell us a little bit, how did you get to work on this kind of research project? What did you do before that led you to this? I'm thinking from a perspective of a colleague, faculty or students who are thinking about engaging with this and they're not sure how to move from what they're doing now to this kind of work. Tell us a little bit about the story.
So for me, the first time I engaged, I took a queer theory class as a graduate student.
Of course she did.
But the first time that I actually engaged with this work, it was because I was at a conference and I was kind of critical of the heteronormalizing practices that were happening at a conference. And I was very critical of the ways in which certain identities and certain ways of being were being celebrated and given space and others were not. And I think about this a lot in conferences and where we're willing to have where we're willing to have conferences and not have conferences and various things that we do and don't do. But I made a comment and someone said, well, why aren't you doing this research? You're gay. And I said, oh, right, okay. So that the first step is that I was challenged by actually a former colleague at TC, although I was not at TC at the time, but to say, what, no one's writing about this, why aren't you? And there's problems with that, right? It's the problem is that I'm, assigned to, oh, you're gay, you therefore should write this work. But at the same time, the question is, why wasn't I actually stepping into this work? And if I'm doing critical social studies work, why am I not stepping into this?
Critical social studies. Fucking critical social studies. Are you kidding me? I know I shouldn't be surprised about this. These people use every tool they have in their toolbox to force this ideology on people, but I just never considered that they were doing critical social studies. Coming soon to a public school near you. Brian says, $5 says eventually emo and goth will fall under Q. It already is, Brian. It already is. Like, they already do this. I mean, can you think of anyone that can you think of an instance that you have seen where a high school girl, probably, maybe that's just what I relate to, but a high school girl dresses emo or goth and they're not going to fall in with the community that considers themselves queer? Because I can't think of that reality. I was the goth emo girl in high school. And I absolutely would have been transed. I 100% would have been transed. I know that for like an absolute fact. If I had gone to high school today, like I was when I was in high school, 1000% would have been transed by the school. So I think that's already happening. You win the bet. Congratulations.
Space. And so for me, that became an incentive to do that. My work more recently, I've worked a lot with African immigrant youth and queer youth.
Sam, she's not saying critical social theory. She's saying critical social studies. I think those are two different things. She did not say critical social theories. She said critical social studies.
And I think that people sometimes struggle to see the connection there. And I think the lives are very different, but the questions of how one becomes visible are relevant.
I understand
And
why you
kind of the
misheard that.
different
No,
ways
I'm not
that
trying to be a
one's-
bitch or
So
anything.
one of the challenges in working with queer youth is, particularly in history classrooms or talking with young people about history, is that queer youth are often not raised in households and communities that are queer. And so coming out requires a transition of communities, and it changes something. There's a disruption, there's a disjuncture that we need to attend to as well. And I think that's different than for many other ways that we talk about diversity and diverse communities. There's something different around gender, sexuality, and coming out process, and how we are raised in community and find community. And there's overlaps and there's differences, and I think it's worth keeping that in mind. And so for me, there's been similarities with the work with African immigrant youth. So I keep coming ebbing and flowing back in these works. As you know, also right now, I think there's a calling and the need for work given what's happening in the country.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said you set up this comparison between the two, what seems to be from afar very two different cases, like because that's one of the challenges I have in my work as well, where people don't understand why
I
you
hate
do
the French
sustainability
accent.
and
I hate it.
LGBT,
And I
like
can say
what's
that
the
because I'm
two
French, mostly
issues.
French.
And I think one of the beautiful things at TC, at Teachers College, is that we can really do this kind of work and develop this kind of bigger picture, or to zoom out and to see the similarities
I hate
between
this
this
accent.
movement. So I'm really happy you said that. Which leads me to my next question. Many people do research on LGBT, but it stays in the margin, right? People think that, oh, this is LGBT research. And I want to ask you, what insights does research on LGBT issues offer to the broader field of education? In other words, why does it matter?
Yes.
And
Say
let's make the
Foucault.
case for more general interest in the topic.
Well, I mean, I think one of the
Oh, he's Israeli? It sounds French,
I love this
though.
question. I think it's a really complicated
His
question.
accent sounds French.
So
It
on the
doesn't
one
sound
hand,
Israeli.
It matters in and of itself because schools are so fundamentally structured around gender. And we don't, it's part of the reaction we're getting right now in the quote I gave from Judith Butler.
Schools are structured around
is that
gender?
the ideology that the whole structure of school is founded on a gender binary.
How?
And the idea that gender, we have to kind of first of all begin to.
If the whole structure of school was founded on the gender binary, then there would be boys' kindergarten and girls' kindergarten, boys' first grade and girls' first grade. That is fundamentally not true. She's lying. She's making shit up. Just because there are boys' bathrooms and girls' bathrooms and boys' sports teams and girls' sports teams does not mean that school is structured around the gender binary. When I was in elementary school, and actually when I was like in middle school too, though I lost interest in high school, I used to be like one of the first people. Okay, so I'm like a tomboy, right? I was a sporty girl back in the day. I was really good at sports from like a young age. And so I would always be one of the first people picked in gym class. I was not the first girl picked in gym class. I was one of the first fucking people picked in gym class. That wouldn't have happened if schools were structured around the gender binary. So no, she's making this whole part up.
Work, and I do this in my recent work, we can't separate gender and sexuality. They're intimately intertwined. One's gender is deeply intertwined with one's sexuality.
Oh, really?
And so those ideas that these are independent of one another, we can talk about gender and sexuality. I question the use of the word "and" rather than gender sexuality. So
I haven't heard that from many people like her before.
First of all, it's important in and of itself because schools themselves are, and education itself is so fundamentally gendered. And so that we need to talk about. And it's not just, I mean, I come from social studies.
Isn't it a little bit misogynistic to say that girls need a different educational experience than boys? Doesn't that sound kind of like the patriarchy?
studies. In my class last night, we were having a great conversation about the sciences and how our very paradigms around gender challenge and force us to then see the world, the natural world, the earth, in a very kind of gender capacity. And so it functions, that gendered lens comes through all of the different disciplines that we study in school. So the first thing is I want to kind of say the work in and of itself about disrupting gender is relevant, is fundamental to school and the work we're doing around equity in schooling. It ties into, it has strong intersections with the work on race and how kind of that intersection of gender and race in schools is so fundamental to people's experiences and the structure of inequality and the structure of schools themselves. But more broadly to your question, I think that, you know, there's the ways in which we
Thank you, Red
think
Sings
about
the Blues.
how
I'm looking forward
for
to
all
it.
of the conversations we're having about
Red Sings the Blues. If there is a link that people can watch the interview on, can you please email that to me, because I'll make sure the chat has it before we wrap up the stream today. Thank you so much.
Disrupting dominant narratives and how we find and the tools that we use to disrupt master narratives is super important. And the work we're doing here around gender and sexuality is just one piece of that. And I think that the ways we're finding to think about how does gender work, critique and move forward the work that's already being done in critical social studies and these ideas about what are these literacies of equity look like. So it has places beyond, of course, the work around gender and sexuality.
Wow. I could go more in depth on that question, because I think there is so much to unpack with what you said. But in sake of time, and I want to give the audience opportunity to ask us questions as well, maybe we can move to a question: what are the main challenges of doing this kind of research on LGBT issues in education?
So I think the main challenges are partially represented in the work that makes that about getting access to young people, while also protecting young people.
Hang on, Turd Ferguson is making a good point, and even though I hate his name, we do have to acknowledge when people make good points. As a dialectic tool, bodies is useful when you want to replace individuals, or excuse me, when you want to reduce individuals to the atomized person who is completely interchangeable and can be sacrificed to the greater good without a second thought. I think that is a really great point. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson, for that. I hate that word. I hate that word so much. I have an aversion to it. Yes, Kino, I saw your joke on Twitter. Well, it wasn't your joke, but I saw that. That was a little funny.
And then also some of the challenges that we're relating to right now, which is particularly now in this.
She doesn't care about helping children.
Political climate.
None of them care
like
about
in my
that.
work with young people right now, like I will not work with young people from Texas, even though my study is nationwide, because the risk that I could ask a non-binary young person to put under their parents to participate in a research study, the risks are too high.
Wow.
So I specifically won't work with young people in Texas right now, even in a digital platform, because I bring them too many risks.
This woman
so
thinks a
there's
lot of
moments
herself.
Like that to consider.
If she considers herself to be a woman, she might
so
be
another,
a they.
Another
I'm
challenge,
not sure.
of course, is how do we? There's so little research actually done with young people, meaning ages of under 18, because we need waivers of consent, and I think we need more research on the more ways to support waivers of consent for youth who are under 18, because the possibility of having to get consent, the coming out process, and it may not be something bad could happen, but young people aren't always ready to come out, or how to articulate that to an adult. We don't always know. And so the idea of this equation, first of all, with the kind of the victim status that we align to young people, we need to kind of disrupt that. And we need to say that is not the singularity of narratives that define queer youth. And we see that in the amazing content that youth are creating. But that becomes part of the challenge of accessing young people. So how do we do that? How do we kind of change the waiver of consent process in order to really allow young people to not have to come out to their family in order to participate? So I think those are, for me, the real challenges, and making sure that people are really supported and safe in being able to share in the work, particularly amongst the acts that we're talking about right now.
Sandra, you mentioned a lot the issues of ethics, IRB, the Institutional Review Board, preventing risk or harm on kids. Are there any other challenges? Is there still a stigma in your subfield of people doing this kind of research? Is it being looked down on? I will confess that 10 years ago, I believe in my field in comparative education, that was a no-no. Nobody did it because it was so stigmatized. Is that still the case is that the case in social studies?
Probably. I mean, I noticed that there's always that one session on gender at a conference. There's always in the room in the basement in the bottom corner. So I want to say like, no, we value it. But then I think about like where we get located, or we get like the last slot on the conference schedule, which, I think is worth talking about like what that is in terms of representation and status. So I don't think
the last slot on the conference schedule can be great. I love the last slot on the conference schedule. I really do. I've been the last slot on the conference schedule so many times. You get a great room of people. Like, it's always a great reception because people are already keyed up and ready to go and they've had a good conference. She's complaining about something that's actually a good thing. Has she never heard the term save the best for last? This is a great example of how these people interpret everything in the worst possible way you can possibly interpret it. The last slot on the conference schedule can be a great effing spot.
it has this, I don't think it has the same status. There's three of us doing this work. So I certainly doesn't think it has a prevalence that, certainly is a challenge. But yes, of course.
And then funding, is it easy to get funding to this kind of folk? I'm asking all the questions that a doctoral student would like.
I can't answer that because I'm in the project right now. I mean, I can be honest in this group, right? I'm on the summer group trying to find grants, and I'm searching for money right now because I want to do this policy work. Like, I want to have the money to travel to California to sit in these classrooms and see the impact of this curricular work on young people. But I need funding for that, and I haven't yet figured out how to get funding for it. So
okay. When you get the funding, let me know.
I will do.
I'll be happy to celebrate that. Lastly, for my end, and then we'll move to the audience, what are some interesting research questions we should explore in this area moving forward?
Well, I think so. I wrote down a couple of things, and one of the things I'm most interested in, and I want to do
only when it's convenient for them, Mr. Ferguson. I appreciate the super chat. Thank you.
We make these assumptions about the ways in which this work acts on young people, and I mean young people across the board, right? Because we're trying to not only.
Let me see. What you doing, buddy? Are you familiar with John Taylor Gatto? Yes, I am. I find his books on our education system important for understanding what we're up against. I 100% agree with that. John Taylor Gatto has done great work in this. I actually write about John Taylor Gatto in my first book, which is called Zen Your Work, which I wrote way before I got into any of this nonsense. But yeah, he writes about so the section I wrote about him was about how basically schooling kills our creativity, which is actually a really big problem, and we're seeing manifest in the world right now. But I think that, he's written a lot of other important things too. I appreciate his work. I appreciate you bringing it up. Thank you for the super chat.
LGBT curricular work is not only trying to support kind of young people who might be at risk somehow in their coming out process, is also to find identity with youth who are supported in their coming out process, but it's also for how do we change the gendered lenses through which everyone is gazing at the world. And so the impacts that I'm asking about, there might be different levels of impact, but we want to see like, what is this work actually doing? If we have these kind of queer literacies happening in classrooms, can we get into the classrooms and really study what's happening in the classrooms, how this work is shaping young people? And then this isn't, you said a research, the question you asked us about what are the research questions. And I don't know that this isn't so much a question, but I think we need to do more with young people. Young people are creating, and I don't know if that changes the way we do research, right?
This woman's going to start studying TikTok. Mark my word, she's going to write a TikTok paper.
Which I think has implications for how we view participation. Young people are already creating knowledge, so it challenges our research methods. That going and interviewing young people who are already content creators kind of belittles the work in the ways they're already part of a knowledge production community. And so I think that's an interesting thing to wrestle with. I don't have the research question attached to it yet, but I think it's something for us to wrestle with as researchers, particularly those of us who are not Gen Z. So what is it like to kind of recognize and build from those forms of knowledge production?
Wow, fantastic. I will just end and say that I find a lot of similarities between what you're doing on LGBT and what we're doing with my team on climate youth activists, that they are producing knowledge, challenging assumptions or discourse around this topic. So at some point, I would love us to think about the comparative study of these two contemporary movements. But I want to go to the audience. I received a couple of questions in.
Hang on, I want to show you guys Scott's question. Anyone else get irrationally angry about this? Scott, I used to get very angry about this, and there are times when I'm watching these things where I will get angry about it, either this or Socialism Saturday. I think, for me, and this is a bad thing, honestly. This is why I need you guys to keep me honest sometimes. I need your help in understanding when stuff is legitimately crazy, because I have watched so much of this garbage that I'm pretty desensitized to it at this point. And so I don't get as angry about it now as I did before. And I think that that's probably true for other people here. But and this is just a general note to people in the chat, people who may watch the replay, what have you. If you see something that you think is legitimately crazy, please call it out. Please chat in, please leave a comment, because I'm so desensitized to this stuff that I don't always know what's legitimately crazy, and because I've seen it all before. But we can all help each other out with that. But don't get angry. Anger doesn't help anyone. I try to view it from a very detached perspective, but if you have feelings about it every once in a while, you're being perfectly normal.
And I have some of the registration questions. I'm encouraging everybody to send me questions. We'll try to cover as many as possible. Sandra, what can educators in conservative states do in their classrooms to add LGBTQ curriculum without the fear of breaking the law?
So it's a really hard question. This question is interesting because I feel like when I was a high school teacher, this was such a question, and then the climate began to change, and now we're back again. And so I think, in some ways the laws are scarier now than they were 20 years ago. And so I think, so one thing is this question was just about what do we do as teachers? Well, one of the things that I mentioned or tried to mention in the presentation is that I think about thinking about queerness rather than LGBT is also productive, because it gives us, maybe we don't infuse direct content. But part of what we're trying to get at in talking about gender and sexuality is we're trying to open these conversations with young people. That gender is not this kind of binary, that gender roles, identities, bodies are disconnected, complex cartographies. So how do we open that space, right? Even if we don't ever use particular languages, how is we open space? What is it? How do we in science classes choose to refuse a binary in terms of how we identify the language around us? When do we ask questions in geography classrooms about the pronouns that we assign to? When do we in language classrooms address the idea about why is it that Western languages have he, she pronouns and many other languages do not? And what does that do about how gender has structured our language and our linguistic systems? So I think there's things that we do, even if we're in a place where we fear kind of, if I say gay, I will lose my job, or these things will happen to me. There's ways in which we kind of constantly include a social critique around gender and sexuality that opens that up without ever saying gay. And I think that's the space to kind of live in, that I have the best advice for right now.
Fun fact, the Don't Say Gay bill doesn't say gay in it.
That's the case, and slowly trying to work with educators who
at
are
all
in those states. And that for those educators in states who have the 30-day wait period, it is still better to utilize the 30-day wait period than to abandon curriculum altogether. And so states like Tennessee,
Yeah.
is that what you're going to ask?
Yeah.
So states like Tennessee have what they call a 30-day wait period and a parental opt-in or parental opt-out. And so you must give parents 30 days to respond to the inclusion of LGBTQ curriculum. So use it. It is awful. It shouldn't be there, but it is there. But I think the one thing we see when we see restrictions like that is we see that we can't do this. And what it says is we actually...
She's basically telling people to obfuscate the law. She's saying parents have 30 days to tell you not to teach this. But in the meantime, you can still teach it. You have to wait the 30 days to hear from parents. But if you haven't heard from them yet, it's perfectly fine to teach this material.
It has restrictions. We should fight those
exactly,
restrictions.
Zipidus. Exactly.
But in the meantime, the restriction is aimed to force you to never bring up the content. So if no one ever challenges the policy and actually uses the policy and says, fine, I'll do the 30-day. I'll do it, and I'm going to create this amazing unit on LGBTQ content.
Wow. They're telling them, get it all in. Get it all in the first 30 days. Teach them everything in the first 30 days. And then there's nothing those evil conservative parents can do. Jenny's getting inky with it. Interesting, they say knowledge production. I thought knowledge came from observation for the most part. Producing it sounds like manipulation. That's a really interesting observation, Jenny. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you for sharing with us, and thank you for the super chat.
I'm going to have these 4 students opt out, but I'm going to have these students engaged in listening who need it as well.
I didn't know about that option, so this is great.
There's 3 states who have have the parental permission.
So it's Tennessee.
I'd have to go back to that map and double check the others. Yeah,
It's okay. We will look at that later. But a related question is, how can school teachers support their students' activism surrounding these issues, which is different than teaching about the issues?
So I need to be careful because this is being recorded, and I'm sure that this can be shared and come back to Han in terms of inciting.
Hi.
And I think, again, I love these questions.
Yes,
I
it can.
hate to always have the answer be like, there's so much variation, right? Like school context matters. And this goes back to the curricular piece as well. The other thing about that is you need to know your school. There's states and there's schools, and there's school and community level involvement, and you need to know your community as well. And it doesn't mean that if you live in a supportive community in an unsupportive state that no one will ever say anything. But the supporting community around it is different than if you're in an unsupportive community in an unsupportive state. And so you need to know that when working with young people as well, because if you're doing things that put yourself and them at risk, there's a different set of actions one needs to take. But generally, I think one of the things that I think is super important, and this comes back to my last remark on the slide, which is we need to talk a lot with young people about digital literacy and how to be safe on digital spaces, because a lot of the activism that young people are engaging in is using those spaces. And so even if we're not directly engaging with them around LGBTQ activism, how is it we're engaging around activist spaces and helping them understand how to use those spaces in smart and thoughtful ways?
So you're saying teachers should be teaching activism.
People are taking
Got
advantage
it.
of, kind of turned in. There's dangers that happen in those spaces, and the way that content can get shared and can bring retribution. And so, we can talk about the algorithms on TikTok and how to utilize them. I mean, there's all sorts of great conversations around digital spaces that we can still be having. And also, I think the most important thing is the ways in which we can try to be visible and to show up for young people. So that means, even if I can't talk about it in school, doesn't mean I can't fight it outside of school. And the young people, and let that be visible, let that be acknowledged as well, because young people need to know that they're not alone in this. This comes back to your climate movement as well. The young people are constantly saying, like, this isn't, in climate change is different because it's like, hey, y'all started, y'all are part of the biggest part of the problem. But here, we're all in this together. And so let students know that you're also part of this, this activism.
This is fascinating. I never thought about the digital literacy as an opening for this kind of conversation. Thank you. This is great. I'm going to bring a couple of questions from the chat I received, and I'm inviting everybody to use the minutes we have to send more questions. So this person is saying, I'm curious to know how South American and Caribbean countries navigate issues pertaining to LGBTQ people or issues, specifically Cuba, where education is really stamped in their culture. Any information or sources on these countries that we can learn more about? I'm asking you to wear your comparativist hat for a second.
I do not have I will be honest, I do not have a comparativist hat that engages with Latin America and South America, South America and Central America and the Caribbean. I tend to work on the African continent, so I do not have a good comparative lens to offer at all.
Is there research in Africa that is happening on this? I know a couple of colleagues that are writing on this. Some of them are TC alumni. But are there any other countries that maybe people can look at from your own reading of the literature?
I mean, I think there's good work in Chile being done around gender. So I know that from a student who's been doing this work. I have a doctoral student whose research was in Chile, and we talk a lot about the work being done in Chile, kind of leading some conversations around gender and sexuality. So that might be a place to turn to. There is, and I have to double check it, but there is a website that I often use in my classes that helps to document policies across countries around the globe, and it looks at a whole range of gender and sexuality related policies It looks at the history of those policies and it continues to update them regularly. I can, if someone leaves me their name, I can send you the link to that website, to that mapping project. I do forget the name of it offhand. I would need to send you the link, but that's a powerful way to trace policies and to kind of look at local culture. They do a great job of keeping updated and tracing history across kind of, I think there's 11 parameters in which they evaluate policies related to gender and sexuality.
Great. I will follow up and we will add it to the recording of the session for today as a resource. And I'm also sharing with everybody once again the link to the Go Lead database on NGOs that do this kind of work internationally, where you can find more resources. Sandra, if I may, I have one more question for you. How do school administrators who are often not well versed on LGBT inclusiveness set up frameworks and guidelines for teachers to implement these curricular changes? As a gay educator, I often see my straight colleagues and school administrators frustrated and tense about how to implement inclusive practices in the classrooms. Do you have any suggestion about this?
Yeah, the teachers that I work with talk a lot about this. And I think one is that, number one, they're going to make mistakes. And so part of it is, how do we support them? Second, there's some really good, so California, particularly UC Davis, has a center on queer history because of the mandate. And they're doing some really good, they've released some really good work. And
UC Davis has a center on queer history.
I have one or two other organizations that have really good curriculum materials and support that I can also add to the list of resources. But I think the first thing is to kind of...
Side note, I have a whole bunch of side projects that I have kind of like on the list to do as soon as I get Schools Exposed launch, which should be next effing week. But one of the things I want to do is make a massive mind map of all the consulting companies that are, or like, you know, community partners that are serving like K through 12 education to indoctrinate this woke bullshit in there. But another side project I want to do is I want to make a list of like all of the crazy effing centers at universities, like that center at Berkeley that's like the study of male supremacy or whatever the hell. Like, I want to make a full list of these crazy centers. If anyone wants to help me with that, let me know. I would love help.
Start with, like, they're going to make mistakes. Even if it don't want to feel like this is my job to educate people, like sit in that space a little bit and kind of, how can we educate people, let them make mistakes and stumble, and help reaffirm the desire that they want to do to kind of make some change. One of the things that teachers often say is, like, sometimes the administrators are the ones who most need to know from this. And sometimes as they're rooted in their ways, they don't know how to, you know, even with young people, I see administrators do the strangest things related to trans and non-binary students and say the strangest things. And so, you know, educate them, help them realize that they're making it, overthinking and making this harder than it needs to be. I sometimes watch teachers will say to me, like, it's just, if they stop overthinking it and just say, like, it's not that hard. You just do, like, you add this, so it's not that hard. So help them get out of their stumbling blocks and allow them to. I don't know if that quite answers your question. I hope it provides. But I would just, you know, be a model, have resources, have these handouts we can provide.
Scott, I don't see that link, but if you want to email it to activelyunwoke@gmail.com, that would be great.
You know, help them, give them some idea along the way. For some people, just like I talked about before, you know, one of the things we need to talk about and think about as teachers is that young people are coming out, they're shifting in who their family and their communities are. In the same way, we are asking many people, as I said, gender is so rigidly bound in how we think about schooling. We're asking people to disrupt that framework, and they need some support. They don't necessarily in schools where they're being disrupted. And so, you know, we need to engage them in spaces with discourse that help that disruption.
Great. Sandra, thank you so much for all your presentation and for engaging all the questions. For the audience, we are going to collect all these resources.
All right, guys, it seems like they're done with this one. So because we're on a time crunch, we're going to move right into the next presentation. But I want to pop the link that Red Sings the Blues has sent me in regards to, this is the channel that I'm going to be interviewed on at 7 p.m. And I don't think we're going to be able to watch the whole presentation I've got from this second one, but we'll be able to get a good flavor of it. And again, this is the advocacy presentation that Teachers College at Columbia University gave to their students to teach them how to be good LGBTQ plus advocates. So let's watch a little bit of this one. And I do have to go in probably half an hour or so, but we'll be able to get into it a little bit. All right. And I'm just going to fast forward a little bit because I think this is going to get into a panel. So we're just going to fast forward a little bit. And I don't want to go through hour and a half of bios.
And if there's any dissenting opinions or any ideas where you feel you may not agree with, or you maybe have more curiosity about, feel free to challenge the idea and not the person as well. And if you have any others, feel free to add it in the chat as well, and then we can add it towards our slides. Yeah, and with that, does anyone have like any questions about the guidelines or wanted to add anything else to the chat?
The voice and the face is not matching, and it's perturbing.
I can't figure out how to change my name real fast, but my pronouns are he, him.
Great.
Thank you.
At the
Stunning and
same
brave.
column, I think there's a permission issue about being allowed to change that at the moment, and I'm she, her.
Stunning and brave,
And,
Columbia University.
My pronouns are they, them, theirs.
Obviously, your pronouns are they,
Hamna,
them, bro.
Did you want to share your
Obviously.
pronouns today and introduce yourself?
No, we're not.
Hamna.
No, I'm sorry. We're
and
not listening to intros.
Awesome. And what about everyone else?
I'm also joining from Brooklyn.
Taking us on that journey.
Okay.
Sure,
Fast forwarding. Okay. Now they're getting started. I'm trying to keep us on time. And now it's buffering. Go.
And to educe means to bring forth, to bring out what somebody is already aware of, already capable of. And it's a teacher's or facilitator's job to kind of elevate that. So just by sitting here, we're alive and breathing. We have, that's amazing to recognize that, to be grateful for, life itself. And we're
everyone be grateful for
able
life.
to vote. And even if you're not a U.S. citizen, you still have plenty of civic actions at your disposal. As a resident or citizen of the country, we have many, many people working for us. And whether or not you voted for the person who's currently your elected official, they work for you because you're their constituent. And that's something we're going to highlight in our letter writing to say, hey, I'm your constituent, I live in your district. The tool we're going to use is going to help us identify the district. In the Senate, it's kind of easy because there's 2 senators per state. They represent the whole state. In the House, it's a little more nuanced because of the very specific district boundaries they draw, and you probably heard of gerrymandering, that those district lines actually move pretty frequently. So the point is,
in
you've
New
got
York,
a senator or 2 senators.
it's the
you've
Democrats who do the
got,
gerrymandering.
House representative, you've got a mayor,
You're in New
city
York.
council member, state senator, state assembly person, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and I'm running out of fingers here. So there's multiple people who represent you. Those are some of your assets just by being here. And you can write letters and do phone calls to all those folks. I used to open up those letters. I worked at 2 different U.S. Senate offices, and people would write to us. They would email.
Really?
Back in the day, it was faxes or even carrier pigeon, whatever method that people would
He's a
send
former
notes to us.
political
We had to read
operative.
them
How
and
convenient.
document them. We would actually log them into computer system. At the end of the day, the chief of staff would take a look at what people are saying about a particular issue, and then they would relay that message to the senator. You might wonder too, what's the point of writing to a senator who might already agree with you? If we're here in the Northeast, LGBT, rights are pretty robust. I think the governor of New York actually just signed something today or yesterday, which is great. But the point is to not neglect home base, to make sure that our electeds, we're actually holding them accountable. And you could even thank them too. Again, being on the staff side of this stuff, it goes a long way to recognize the staff's day-to-day efforts, because they do so much of the work. They don't have expertise on every issue. They have to be experts on a million different issues. So part of our job is to, going back to education, we're a teachers college, to educate. to educate about you as a constituent, what you're going through, what your aspirations are, or your hopes are. And then there might even be an opportunity for them to get back to you. So a good representative will not just listen, but also ask questions and want to know you as a teacher, you as a health activist, you as a, whatever role you have as an artist. There's so many people at TC who have different amazing capabilities. They'll come back to you to elevate your voice, and they could even share your story with a colleague who's more on the fence about an issue, right? So not neglecting home base is super important. So, and assets, I mentioned letter writing is one way of taking action, phone calls. We've all probably done things one way or the other. So has anybody here met with, like, this is one of the I want to say the gold standard, but one of the harder kind of labor intensive things to do is meeting and talking with elected officials. Anybody done that in a formal setting, not just like seeing them on the street? So most people. Pamela, would you like to share what that experience was like? Yep.
I had, I'm in New Jersey and I have a representative who is named Chris Smith, and he is anti everything that I believe in. And so I went to Washington to just wander into his staff room and try to have a conversation with him. And he didn't come out, but his staff spoke with me. And they let me see that the only thing on his wall is a picture of the Virgin Mary. And that's it. His whole office is around that. And we didn't have a productive conversation, even though I had planned to be very open and, curious, and all the things I teach about how to interact with people and maybe influence, but didn't work out that way.
Okay, so
I just
you
poured
might
the
not be
whoopie
able
pie
to
beer.
persuade someone in the moment, but you definitely get props for showing up.
Well, okay, so, God damn it, I did it again.
Hi, my name is Matthew.
I did it again. How is it possible that I keep doing this crap? Hang on.
You're showing up again.
Okay, we're back at the spot. Okay, so he's actually making a really good point, and I just want to make sure I'm doing a quick pause to acknowledge this point, because Noah, the first video was actually super woke. So if you want to start at the beginning, you're more than welcome to. I don't know how it's going to compare to this one. So when you're talking to like elected officials, or you're writing letters, or you're doing any of those things, you should never, ever, 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 ever expect someone to agree with you in the very moment that you're talking to them. Don't make that a metric of your success, because it so rarely happens. When you're talking to people, be it elected officials or people who have influence that can influence policy or that sort of thing, view it as planting a seed. You're planting a seed for them to think about. They may not agree with you right that second, but that doesn't mean they're not going to agree with you a week from now, a month from now, 6 months from now, what have you. You're introducing them to an idea, and you're allowing them time to think about it. So never be disappointed if someone doesn't agree with you right off the bat. Also, when you're pushing for legislation for things, they keep, at the state level anyway, I'm sure this is true at the federal level too, but I know it's true at the state level. They keep track of every single email that they get in favor of the legislation and against the legislation. So even if you don't think that you're making a difference by sending an email, you might not ever get a response or anything, they really do keep track of it. And just be very clear at the top when you're sending an email: I support this legislation for reason X, Y, B, and Z. Be very, very clear, because they might not read the whole thing. They might not process the whole thing, but they will see, I support this, or I am opposed to this. All right. And these people do this stuff all the time. So they need people like us to counterbalance what they're doing.
And again, and persistence is definitely a virtue here in the political world. I think we had Jonathan raise his hand. Do you want to share a story?
Sure, yeah. So I am originally from Tennessee, and I went to Washington for a freshman experience trip. And at the time, I don't know if they do this anymore, probably post-COVID they don't, but at the time, the two senators did Tennessee Tuesday. So anybody that was a Tennessee resident could come to this session with them and their staff and speak with them. And at the time when I was in school, our senator was Lamar Alexander and Bob Corker. My main focus was wanting to talk to Lamar Alexander because of his experience with the Bush administration. And it was very much like met him, got to shake his hand, asked me my interest, and then it was like on to the next one. It wasn't very, I wasn't able to talk about specific policy or ask questions about No Child Left Behind or anything like that. But yeah, very light meet and greet, and that was it. That was my experience with him.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for sharing that. Definitely, there's the whole range of experiences that we hear for people having meetings briefly.
This whoopie pie beer is really, really good. It's got and the gremlin beer was all right. Okay, it exploded all over my desk, but it was still all right. Like this whoopie pie beer though, it's called Whoopie Pie in the Sky. It's from Foundation Brewing Company, which is out of Maine. It's really good. It's really rich. It's really like it's got a lot of depth to it. If you see it, I would definitely recommend it.
Themselves or their staff. You know, as I get paid to do this on behalf of Teachers College to go down to Washington and Albany and City Hall and meet with staff and I've had meetings in the hallway, you know, or in the lobby. You know, you hear the term lobbyist, it's because a lot of the work gets done in the lobby. So even the professionals, like that's a lot of the times our experience too. So those are you know, pretty typical things. And you know, we have to be unwavering in our persistence to keep showing up. So other ways of, again, asset accounting, figuring out what we've done. Anybody write letters to Congress or do phone calls?
It's not very sweet. It has a lot of depth. So you can definitely taste the chocolate, but it's like a rich chocolate. It's like a dark chocolate.
To different state senators.
Thank you. And yeah, you could, there's not that many of us, so you're able to speak up or just, you know, raise your hand because the next couple will be rapid fire. So there's letter writing, wonderful. There's also petitions. Anybody, show of hands, do like petitions or, yep. What about voting? Everybody's voted, yeah. Great, so at our disposal, we've got, or there's also rallies. Anybody go to like a rally, something like that? Yeah, a lot of active people here. And what am I missing? Any other form of action you've taken?
You mentioned earlier phone calls, and I've done a phone call before.
Nice. There is political science research that shows causally that phone calls do move the needle in legislation. So Joey, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I also just wanted to say community events are also really important. There's lots of city officials and sometimes even state or federal officials that attend these events and want to talk to people, and it's really like it's beneficial because they're bringing their office to you in a way, and you're able to talk to them and hear them. Just recently, this past weekend, the Pride March happened, so I'm sure that there were a lot of officials who showed face at the event and got the opportunity to speak with many constituents that were there. So that's also a really important part and also really impactful as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And in a place like New York, it is the biggest city in the country, but especially in the city council or city council level, they're neighbors. You know, they're in the neighborhood. They have a presence, and it is a great way to bump into people. It's also community boards. I highly recommend people check out if you're in the city or community.
I mean, this is bizarre to me because this is just a presentation where they're literally teaching students at Teachers College, Columbia, to be activists. I mean, this is like one of the most, like, this is not even theoretical. They are literally teaching them how to do activism as part of like, I mean, they pay for this with like the school budget. They're having the school lobbyists teach the students at the school how to be activists. This is bizarre. Oh God, Stephen, I applied to Teachers College in the fall for private ed administration and leadership masters, but after seeing the $60,000 price tag in wokeism, it didn't seem worth it. No. Stephen, you cannot go to Teachers College. Don't do it. They will ruin you, Stephen. They're the worst.
Community board or your town council if you're out of the city, great ways of getting involved. And I think it's just important to remember all these different ways, because it's, civic action and democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not just once every 4 years and hanging, our fates on those big Supreme Court decisions or those big presidential elections. School boards too. Thanks, Joey, for adding to that. Yeah, TC certainly. We've had people run for office. We have alumni, including Shirley Chisholm, who have held elected office before. So, there's lots of things available at our disposal to on the kind of obvious civic level to take action.
Yes,
And I
Savritz,
think
you can't
now
go to
Joey,
teachers college
is gonna
either.
take us a step deeper here about your particular strengths, right, and your stories, because the word advocacy, again, thinking about the Latin root, is to vocate, to speak out. So, we've co-hosted entire workshops on the art of storytelling and how storytelling with Christina Torres, an amazing doctoral student, who's helps folks, kind of find their voice and share their stories to Congress. Welcome, Clifton. Thanks for coming today. So we'll go around the room. Joey, I think you're going to guide us on our next steps here.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so the power of storytelling is really important. And I think especially as part of the LGBTQ community, I myself have my own lived and personal experiences of, being a queer person and also facing, discrimination at many parts of my life, just being a queer person. So I think it's really important to take those struggles that we faced and share them and put them into light, because, while these laws and policies may be out there into place, there's all these data that's out there showing these big trends and whatnot. It's also the stories that, add more nuances and subtleties and make those numbers and those laws come alive in a way, because it really impacts us. And, I have worked for many years to share my story little by little, depending on my comfort level. And it's really important to just, take whatever you're comfortable sharing, and, whether that's with your group of friends or whether that's with people you've never met, such as politicians and state officials and whatnot, and have your story out there. And I just wanted to gauge within the room, if anyone is part of the community and would like to share any experiences and whatnot as well, if you're comfortable sharing.
Sure, I'll start. So like I had mentioned earlier, I grew up in
This one likes to
Tennessee,
hear himself talk.
specifically in Knoxville, which was nice because it's a school town. So there's definitely a little pocket of like-minded individuals, I would say. But I grew up mostly around conservative Christians, and I grew up in a conservative Christian household. And coming to terms with my sexuality and my identity, as a child and into a young person, was never on the table, right? It was always something that was not talked about, not addressed. And if it was talked about, it was in a demonizing, derogatory way. So it was just never discussed. So I didn't have the opportunity to develop early on. And it was more of a repressed and shame behavior that I kind of created. But as I got older, I was able to meet people and branch out and go to school, which helped a lot, go away to school, and kind of come to terms with my sexuality. And I do identify as gay. And I think a big push for me was having teachers at my university that I attend be open and listening, and some even saying, I'm in the same boat, I'm lesbian, or someone else. And those conversations were amazing, because it was the first time that I had an educator in my whole life be like, hey, yeah, this is normal, this is great, no big deal. And me too, I'm also in that community. And so seeing legislation like Don't Say Gay in Florida, is really kind of hard because like I know what it was like being a kid in a conservative state and not being able to develop or express myself. And I think that's where a lot of my passion comes from now for the community is to be able to have opportunities and experiences like that.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. And as you were talking, I saw that I listened to the part where you were able to gain more friends and networks and people that are also within the same community as you. And going back to what Matt was talking about with asset accounting, I think for me with that word asset, I also think about who you know, right? And who you meet as well. And taking, like the backgrounds and, the lived experiences and putting that into like advocacy efforts and, moving the needle together and moving the needle forward with more people that are like you. So thank you so much for sharing that, Jonathan. Is there anyone else that wants to share? If not, we can also move on to the next portion.
Yeah, and we realize, a lot of this is personal and sometimes it might be painful. So we're totally, that's up to you. And I think that we can draw upon our lived experience and even just synopsize it or condense it in a way. The legislator, at the minimum, you can say, hey, I'm a constituent. You can say, hey, I'm a teacher. Hey, I'm someone who identifies as a certain way. And that is enough. You don't have to dig any deeper than that. But in our challenges, there are often strengths, right? And there are often real assets, in education, especially at a place like Teachers College, we look at an asset-based or strength-based approach rather than a deficit-based approach to teaching. And so for politics, it's really no different. It's building from your strengths.
Culturally responsible teaching is going to be another name for that, what he just said.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was in Hell's Kitchen probably, oh man, it was when the basketball was still going on, so it must have been recently, like 2 weeks ago, and I was on 9th Ave. I'm heterosexual, but I'm walking down 9th Avenue near probably about 48th, and there's that area, there's a large LGBTQ population, and there was these two men, I believe they were gay, and there were a pack of 4 men started harassing them, and one of them spit at the other one. So I try not to usually in this day and age get in the middle, but I was like, okay.
Hang on, Savret says deconstructionist ideologies prey on weak psyches. Isn't that the truth, Savrits? I was thinking about this earlier. I'm really like throwing myself back into meditation and like mindset work because I just really need to for my own sanity. And it's like but like I think sometimes we underestimate how hard it is for people to realize how much power they have over their perspective and their experience. And so pro tip, guys, meditate. You can do spiritual meditations. You can do secular meditations. You can do practical meditations. You can find an app that will teach you how to meditate. But I promise you, you are going to be stronger and more resilient in the world if you meditate. So as Savret says, they can't prey on you.
This is ridiculous. And it wasn't that late at night. There was the bar, Mickey Spillane's, was still open, so I figured people would see from there. So I said, hey, cut it out. And then they started saying stuff to me, and I just called the police. And I just said, okay, the police are on their way.
Wow.
And those 4 kids backed off. But I was like, two guys not minding their own business, and just because of the way they were dressing or holding hands, these other 4 decided that they were gonna start harassing them. And I was like, you can't do that. My mom and dad said, you can't. If you stand by and watch, you're just as bad as the ones who do it. So
Right.
I like to think I'm being proactive in that respect.
Yeah, wow, thanks for sharing that. That's really powerful and definitely not easy to just jump in and put yourself maybe at risk, but there's definitely really value to intervening as a bystander, not just being a bystander. So lots of resources on that I think we could have a whole nother workshop on. I want to just be mindful of people's time. to move us along to the bill of the day here, the Equality Act. So again, we do have a nice fact sheet brought to you by a non-profit think tank about what the bill does. And basically, it gets a lot of existing civil rights legislation up to speed.
All right, guys, since it sounds like they're
and
going to be talking about
I
New
think,
York,
you know,
I'm really glad we watched the other presentation first, because the other presentation was way more woke than this presentation. So I'm glad we watched the other one first. The other one was way more eventful than this one, although this is like the perfect freeze frame for this guy. But because I do have an interview at 7 p.m., I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for right now. Now, I'm putting a link in the chat if you want to come and watch my interview at 7 p.m. You are more than welcome. Let me just, oh gosh, I'm just realizing how much of my beer got all over my computer screen. Luckily, my computer still works. I'm just popping this link into the chats on Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble. Thank you guys for watching me on Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble. If you are not subscribed on Odyssey and Rockfin and Rumble, please make sure you subscribe just in case anything happens to this here YouTube channel. But guys, I do want to remind you that I will be back tomorrow for Socialism Saturday. And tomorrow for Socialism Saturday, starting at 6 p.m., that's not 6, that's 7, 6 p.m., there we go. Tomorrow for Socialism Saturday, we are watching the Seattle Socialism Conference from 5 years ago. It's an older video, which means it's probably going to be more insane. It's going to be a little bit more unhinged. We're talking about pre-Chaz, the pre-Chaz era. So we're gonna see what socialists in Seattle were saying 5 years ago, and I think it's gonna be fascinating. We will see how many of their things they've created. Because remember, the whole premise behind Socialism Saturday is basically, if we listen to what socialists said like 5 years ago, what they've wanted should start to come true around now. If my theory is correct. And so we're going to put this theory to the test tomorrow. We'll see if the Chaz comes up or if it was just but a glimmer of in their eye back then. But guys, please mount the like button on the way out the door. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you are not already. I will see you for Socialism Saturday tomorrow evening. Have a great rest of your night. Take care. We'll see you soon.